somewhere, somehow in the economy of God, you get extra points for showing up. So it's great to be with you today. And that includes everyone online. That includes everyone online. You get extra points for showing up. All right. So given our day today, let me, by way of opening up our exploration of this book, the Book of Common Prayer, one of the things, we'll have a whole class on going over this, but if you open it up to the beginning page that says this, table of contents, table of contents. I just want to highlight, by way of getting to our opening prayer this morning, I want to highlight for you how it's organized. This is kind of helpful for you to see how this book is organized. And there is an entire section on prayer each day, in the morning, in the evening, at noontime. There is an entire section that are called collects. Collects is a word that is used in the Book of Common Prayer for collecting the thought of the day. So it's a prayer that collects the thought of the day or the theme of the day. And so that's what the collects are. And this book that you're holding, this is the first edition of this book you're holding, that offers some services in what we call Elizabethan language, thee, thou, and contemporary language, you, your. Of course, originally this book was written in Elizabethan language and has been only in Elizabethan language up until 1979. So in 1979, we offered some of the worship services in what we call contemporary language. So when it says traditional, that's the Elizabethan language. When it says contemporary, that's just that, contemporary language. Then there's a section for proper liturgies for special days in the Christian year. Ash Wednesday, Palm Sunday, Maundy, Thursday, Holy Saturday, Good Friday, Easter Vigil. There's a service for the sacrament of baptism. There's a section on the services for communion, the Lord's Supper, the Mass, the Eucharist. You'll see there. Then there's a section on what we call pastoral offices, burial, marriage, unction, prayers for those who are dying, confession. There is a service for confession. We'll go over that. And then there are ordination services. We call these Episcopal, or services that bishops only lead, ordination services. There's the entire book of Psalms. There's prayers. There is an outline of the faith or catechism. Then there are some historic documents. There's a table for finding special days like Easter and other holy days, because the Christian calendar is based on the lunar system. That's why Easter doesn't fall on the same day every year, right? We have lectionaries. Lectionaries are an order for reading the Bible in worship. So we have an order for which readings will be read in church on Sundays. And we have an order for which readings would be read for daily prayers, morning prayer, evening prayer, noontime prayer. So you see all of that in the Book of Common Prayer, and we're going to have another different class, not today, where we go over that more specifically. But given today, I want to point your attention to the service of morning prayer on page 47. Page 47. You more want to get in. A few more want to get in. We have, in the service of morning prayer, there are what we call canticles or hymns that are based off of biblical passages or other types of traditional liturgical prayers and or hymns. So this is a very famous one in the life of the church. This isn't new. This is quite old. It's called the Song of Creation, and there's separate sections. There's one for the cosmic order, where we praise the heavens and the firmaments, the moon and the stars, the winds and the fire and the heat. And then here's the one that's appropriate for today. O ye dew and frost, bless ye the Lord. O ye frost and cold, bless ye the Lord. O ye ice and snow, bless ye the Lord. Praise him and magnify him forever. Amen. So you'll see there's a series of canticles for morning prayer, for evening prayer, and we'll find some time to go over those in one of our classes. We'll go over the details of this book. Well, it's great to be with you today. 3 more people. We're a big online class today. Right. Well, welcome back. It's good to be with everyone today. And we're going to continue on in our exploration of the Episcopal Church. Last week, I started by letting you know that the way in which I lead this class is by trying to locate the Episcopal Church in the midst of the Christian breadth of denominations and experiences, right? And so I expressed that last week by talking about how there is a spectrum of Christian denominations and experiences based on what you might call, this is not the only way to understand them. So just take the way in which I do this with a good deep breath and grain of salt, so to say. It's just one way, one window into trying to understand. Those of you who've studied history know this type of thing. You have different windows and ways in which you can look at a period of history, right? You can look at it from its religious perspective. You can look at it from its political perspective. You could look at it from its geographical perspective. And so I'm just using this window into the Christian life in terms of the way that churches set themselves up to be run and understand themselves. So this is the window by which we will look at the theology and the liturgy of the Episcopal Church. And on one end of the spectrum, you have what we call magisterial types of denominations, which is in the Roman Catholic realm. Roman Catholic, go off the screen here, don't I? The Roman Catholic kind of way in which the church is organized, where there are leaders who do organize and make decisions for the life of the church. It's understood that those individuals have been ordained by God to do such, and those decisions are holy and right, and they come down into the life of the community. The Roman Catholic system, the Orthodox or Eastern churches of Christendom, the Greek and Russian and Armenian and Syrian and Coptic churches of Christianity. And then you have what you might call the Reformation happens, where the organizing the church that way is challenged, right? And then churches that count themselves among the churches that are part of the Reformation can also go from here all the way over to here. From churches that still have, Protestant churches that still have bishops and councils of the church, that help organize and make many decisions, to congregations that consider themselves free church, if you will, where each individual gathering of Christians is its own decision-making group and is beholden to no other group at all. And so that's kind of a spectrum of how Christian groups and denominations kind of organize themselves. And I have broadly characterized those as magisterial, confessional, biblical, and then this is kind of an anomaly, liturgical. I'm going to use that for the Episcopal Church, and we'll talk about that. So magisterial, confessional would be congregations that feel as if, or at least describe that their authority comes from the confession of faith that the group subscribes to and set as their standard. In the Presbyterian Church, it's the Westminster Confession. In the Methodist Church, it's the Book of Discipline, for example. In the Lutheran Church, it's Luther's Catechism, so for example. And then what I describe as, biblical traditions, and that is that they understand themselves as there's no other authority but the Bible. How that gets interpreted, you may question and not question, but nevertheless, that's kind of how the self-description is. Often many of the congregations in what we understand to be the Baptist tradition self-describe that way. How it plays out is not necessarily that way, but nevertheless, that's kind of a self. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. One more. Yeah, thank you. No, that's, I know. You can do right in the, yeah. Any questions about that? Comments? Insights? As I said last class, I work in this class, I work in generalities. So there's always ways to parse this much more deeply. And I don't mean to suggest life in Christianity is as simplistic as I'm describing it in these 3 minutes right here on this line. It's not. But I'm working in generalities just simply to give us a sense of the Episcopal experience. Yeah.
My article, Nationals were Republican,
Right.
Biblical is for anarchists or whatever. But they do come to
Yeah, there's always someone who's in charge, so to say, in a sense. You'd have to get into kind of a Quaker tradition for you to be in a space that is at least perceived to be, this kind of pure democratic, although as one of my good Quaker friends says, it's just because I don't know, many of you probably know some of this tradition better than me, but in the Quaker tradition, everybody gets in the worship space and there's silence until the Spirit moves somebody to speak, and that movement to speak is considered authoritative. And as one of my good Quaker friends says, I don't know why the Holy Spirit only speaks to Janet every single week. And Janet always seems to know what the Holy Spirit has to say, right? So, so anyway, be that as it may. So Within every one of these traditions, there is a way in which authority, decisions are made and authority is set up. All right, now, what I want to do today is step back a little bit, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on the Church of England and the kind of 16th century Reformation piece about the Anglican Church, but I want to spend a little bit of time on it because I do think that it helps us understand how the Episcopal Church in the United States, which is, as I mentioned, a completely separate denomination than the Church of England. I want to spend a little bit of time on it. Okay, so let's do that today. And let's start with remembering that it is really not in the 16th century, but in the 15th century that within Europe, begins to be quite a bit of rumbling about the way in which the church is operating. Remember, there is no Roman Catholic Church. It is just the church, okay? And so there is rumbling about the way in which the church is operating, and begins to be questions about how the church is gathered, and honest questions about corruption within the church, right? And those questions have to do with not just corruption in the way that you and I think of corruption in terms of financial or what's the word I'm looking for? Getting your own cronies in political positions, stuff like that. That, is probably part of it. But it also has to do with kind of theological corruption, starting to question the idea that, for example, if you don't take communion in the right way on certain days, you're in danger of not being accepted into God's, kingdom, things like that. So that starts to become questioned by people in the church. It really starts, believe it or not, in all places in Poland. And so anyway, we could spend a lot of time on this, but nevertheless, I'm not going to do that. And so within a short amount of time, 100 years or so, kind of reformed ideas in the church are really gaining strength, Some of the other kind of claims are, one of the big kind of examples of this, it's not the only example, but it's kind of like your perfect vignette of describing what is meant by corruption is purgatory, right? So you die, you go to purgatory, and then there's an elaborate system of how you or the church can get people out of purgatory. You pay dues, somebody can get out of purgatory. You pay enough money to the church, and then the church will have prayers for your person to get out of purgatory. That's the type of example of theological corruption that is being named. I actually happen to believe if you think about it from a spiritual perspective, there can be this beautiful idea about purgatorial aspect of life after death, but that's a different conversation. But that does end up becoming kind of the perfect little example of theological. It's not the only one, but perfect little example to us, our modern ears, about what's being described. So we have this Reformation movement happening all throughout Europe. Now, underneath, of course, as I said, we could spend this is an entire history class, right? Much of it is about political, lots of it is about politics and kings and certain areas throughout Europe who don't want to be under the authority of Rome, and clergy who have the backing of the princes of Germany so that they can now, they feel safe to criticize Rome, and all of that stuff is going on throughout the Germanic areas and France and Spain and all types of other places. Of course, the big culmination that's often noted in this conversation is Luther's theses nailed against the wall in Wittenberg. And he has 99 theses of all the reasons why the church is now corrupt and how things have to change. It's important to realize that Luther wanted things to change. He didn't necessarily want to start a new church. He wanted things to change. He wanted the church to be corrected, just like St. Francis earlier. So he wanted the church to be corrected, not necessarily have a new church, right? And so he nails these 99 theses on the door of the cathedral to name all the ways in which the church should change. Of course, my favorite one, can't remember which number it is I love the way, the tone of it. He says, besides, who knows if everybody in purgatory wants to get out anyway? That's one of the theses. So you can see how kind of petty in moments this is, right? So anyway, that's a big demarcation in the life of the Reformed. Meanwhile, this all takes place. And this energy is present over on the island, the British Isles. Being an island made a difference in this time for Britain to be an island, because it took a long time for things to get over there, right? And so also theological ideas. Now, they did get over to England, and Protestant kind of thought was rampant among the clergy way before Henry VIII. This is very important for us to understand. For the Church of England, Henry VIII is this big demarcation in the life of the church, understandably so. But don't think for a minute that Henry just woke up one day and decided he wanted to be a Protestant and just snapped his fingers and it was all, it all happened. It was rampant among the clergy in England, even before Henry VIII. So, and by the time though that Henry VIII comes along, different forms of this Reformation idea are present. You have Luther and his kind of way of speaking about reform, which, believe it or not, was much more still kind of, we need reform, we need the church to change. We don't necessarily need a new church. Luther, you can go to Germany today, and in many of the Lutheran churches, look and act and behave, both in worship and otherwise, just as if they're a Roman Catholic congregation. Luther didn't necessarily want to throw the bathwater out with the baby out with the bathwater completely. It did end up kind of happening, but so you have kind of Lutheran theological ideas. And then by the time we're talking about the English Reformation, you also have kind of Calvinistic theological ideas, because John Calvin had been ministering for many years in the borders of France, what is now Switzerland area, and really hammered home his ideas about Reformed being Reformation ideas. And he was much more kind of, we do need a new church. We need the church to operate differently. And he had very specific liturgical ideas. Every single kind of, well, in general, his thrust was that physical things distract us from God, right? Everything from candles on the altar to anything else distracts us from God. So there's this type of theological kind of foment, idea that is present. And so these kind of reformational ideas are strong in Europe, and they are beginning to gain strength in England in the late 1400s, the early 1500s, and they're all very present and strong, if you will. So that is going on. And then, yes, you do get the political crisis of Henry VIII, who needed an heir. His first wife, Catherine of Aragon, did not have a son. I mean, I guess if you wanted to do it, some people would not be happy that I'm doing this, but nevertheless, if you wanted to say, what would you do as the King of England in the 1500s, right? There was no question he needed an heir. So he wanted to have a new wife to get an heir. And Catherine family were basically related to the Bishop of Rome, the Pope. So the Pope said absolutely not. And so long story short, yes, he does declare that the Church of England is its own church. That he will be the head of the church. But he doesn't change how the church operates. If he had followed John Calvin's idea, there would be no bishops. But he doesn't change that, kind of leaves this, and this becomes a theme of both the Anglican tradition and today, even in the Episcopal Church. He leaves in place many of the structures of the church, just simply says, I'm now the head of the church that is in England. Yes, we do kind of claim some Protestant ideas at the same time, but nevertheless, I'm the head of the church. The Church of England is separate from the authority of the Bishop of Rome, and we are our own church. And he makes this claim, and he enacts it. Now, it goes along with, he needed a lot of money. There were monasteries all over England that held much of the land and received much of the income of the people. He wanted to capture all of that, make it all go to the crown. He did do that. That's why you can go on these tours to all of the abandoned monasteries in England and see all these structures today. So you get in England, you get this situation where the church is now in England is now a Protestant church, but we're not going to spend all time on this, but just know that it was not a resolved question on whether or not the Church of England would remain that way for nearly another almost 100 years. It was a political and religious fight on how the Church of England would be organized for almost another 100 years. In the end, some of you really know this history. Henry dies, his young son comes to the throne. He's surrounded by protectors who are even more dedicated to Protestantism. So the church goes even deeper into Protestant ideas during those years, just a few years, I think 3 or 4 years. He dies, sick boy dies. His sister Mary comes to the throne, who is devoted to her mother, Catherine of Aragon, turns the Church of England back under the authority of Rome. That lasts 4 or 5 years until Mary dies. Her sister Elizabeth comes to the throne, daughter of Anne Boleyn, the second wife of Henry VIII, she is devoted to Protestantism. So the Church of England goes back to being a Protestant church. And it's really under Elizabeth I that there is this cementation of the fact that the Church of England will be a Protestant church. But within that, there is still great fighting and debate on whether or not what type of Protestant church it will be. Because even under Elizabeth, we held the same, many of the same structure of the church with bishops and clergy, ordained by bishops. But there's a huge faction that want to follow more John Calvin's way of doing things and make it more Presbyterian in nature, where there are no bishops and the clergy decide everything. That culmination of all that happens in the mid-1600s with the Civil War in England, where Charles I is beheaded. All right, so we'll leave that there. The Church of England is a Protestant church, and then you get the early 1600s, and the colonies here in the United States start to be populated, right? Now, whether or not you think it was in Jamestown or in Plymouth, doesn't really matter. There's probably a colony in Jamestown earlier than Plymouth, and probably a colony in the Outer Banks of North Carolina, even before that. So nevertheless, the colonies here in the United States start to be populated. And of course, they are British colonies, and there are 13 original colonies. And throughout the colonies, there are congregations that are congregations of the Church of England. And you can find these congregations to this day throughout the 13 colonies, everywhere from Savannah up to Boston. And there's Old North Church in Boston. There's Trinity Church on Wall Street in New York City. There's Christ Church in Philadelphia. There's St. Thomas Church in Bath, North Carolina. There's churches all throughout the 13 original colonies that began. Of course, there's Williamsburg, Virginia, and churches throughout all of the colonies. Trinity Church in Newport, Rhode Island, which is probably one of the very oldest buildings, 1693, that still exists. And so throughout the colonies, there are congregations that are congregations of the Church of England. For this brief window in our history in the United States, there were state religions in some of the colonies. Of course, in Massachusetts, right? The Puritan time, that was the state religion or way of Christianity in Massachusetts, right? And that's personal history. That's where you get, and for you former Baptists in the group, that's where you get Roger Williams, who started the Baptist everything, who leaves the Massachusetts Bay Colony and goes and starts Rhode Island, is the only colony where freedom of religion was the principle on which it was founded. But I have to say this, because in Rhode Island, they think, Roger Williams is, and I'm related to Roger Williams, the big guy, but he wanted freedom of religion because anybody who wasn't purely Christian would corrupt the church. So if you weren't purely Christian to him, you couldn't even come to the worship service. You had to sit outside. You could come to the first part of the service, but the second part of the service, you had to leave. So anyway, yes, freedom of religion, but freedom of religion because he wanted the church to be protected, right? It's not the same that we think of it today, this kind of great libertarian, idea of freedom of religion. It was a very different way of looking at it. So you get that. And then, of course, we get to a crisis point for these. And then, let me stop for a moment. So in Connecticut, it was Congregationalism was the state religion in Connecticut. And Virginia was Anglicanism. That's why I have so many Episcopal churches in Virginia. So that was the state religion in Virginia. The Church of England was the state religion in Virginia. So you have these little anomaly of history, even within our own history. But then we get the crisis of the revolution, right? 1776. We have a revolution and we declare independence from the monarch in England, and all of the colonies become independent. And so what are we going to do about these congregations? What are we going to do for those in the colonies who consider themselves members of the Church of England? What are we going to do? Because right in the prayers of the people, you have to pray for the king and pray that you are going to be obedient to the king. Well, if you're like part of my family, my mother's family, who were in Sussex, New Jersey, you leave and you go to Canada. And you start a little town in New Brunswick called Sussex. So if you are ever driving, which you probably never will do, driving to, say, Nova Scotia from the United States, you will pass through this little town called Sussex, New Jersey. And if you stop at Trinity Church in Sussex, New Jersey, the stained glass window over the high altar is in memory of a relative of mine. So you could make that decision in 1776 that you're going to leave and go to Canada, where you can still be a member of the Church of England. Otherwise, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to start our own denomination. And that's what happens at the time of the revolution here in the United States. We start our own denomination. But it wasn't easy. There was a problem. And it was true for all types of denominations in the colonies, but it was more of an issue for us as members of the Church of England originally, because our belief, we hold to a belief that's called apostolic succession. And let me just write that down. It's the only marker I have, but apostolic succession. So we hold to a belief called apostolic succession, which simply means that at one level, what it means is that we look toward the original apostles to figure out our faith. That the people who actually knew Jesus are our teachers. And so we believe in this apostolic aspect of our life. Now, it also means that we believe that, in a practical, the claim anyway, is that the original apostles ordained others to go out and be leaders of the church as presbyters, as deacons, as overseers in Greek, episkopos, or bishop, right? And so we hold to, as does the Roman Catholic tradition, and as does the Greek Orthodox and Syrian Orthodox and all the Orthodox traditions, apostolic succession, that when the original apostles ordained people who ordained people who ordained people, their hands actually laid on the heads of people all the way down to me today. and whoever is ordained after me. So at one level, we could say, okay, this is silly. I get that. At another level, continuing to hold on to that helps us see that we do need to go back to the original folks who knew Jesus time and time again. We can't turn this into a spiritual endeavor that everything we're trying to decide is, well, we can just look at this spiritually. Because what can happen is the way that I look at it spiritually is more important than the way you look at it spiritually, right? That's very easy to happen. So the two of us together are required from this kind of way of claiming this to go back to see what those original apostles actually said and how they actually experienced Jesus. So we hold to the claim of apostolic succession, but in 1776, there were no Anglican bishops in the colonies. So how do we get new clergy? There's no way to get new clergy because there's no bishops to ordain new clergy. So this is a problem. It's a crisis. We're beginning this new denomination, and there's no way to get new clergy. And this lasted for a period of time. And some of the clergy in the church were saying, well, we've just got to wait until the opportune time when we can get somebody ordained by a bishop to be a bishop. And others in the former Anglican group were saying, we don't have time. We can't wait any longer. We just need to make a decision. And we're going to decide that it's okay for people who are already ordained priests to ordain somebody else a priest. We don't need bishops to do that, right? And anybody know the name of the people who led that group?
Zealots.
Well, they were zealots, but
Okay.
John and Charles Wesley.
Yes.
They were the rectors of the Anglican Church, and well, not both of them, I think, was it John and Charles? The rector of Christ Church in Savannah, Georgia, and made this decision that we were not going to wait. We were just going to make new clergy. Clergy people could make new clergy people. We don't need bishops, right? And that's where Methodism began. It's not an English thing. There's very few Methodists back in England. It's all the United States, right? So that's how Methodism started. But then there's the other group. Most of them were in like Connecticut and in the New England area, the New York area, said, no, we're waiting. We're going to wait till we can get a clergy person ordained by a bishop. And they waited and they waited, and finally they got agreement from the bishops in Scotland that they would ordain somebody, a bishop for the United States, because the bishops in Scotland hated the English more than anything else. They hated English. So Samuel Seabury, a Connecticut clergyman, actually he was a clergyman of the New England region, went over to Scotland and was ordained in Aberdeen by the Scottish bishops to be a bishop. And he came back to the United States and started ordaining people. Meanwhile, however, we must admit, John and Charles Wesley went to town. They ordained tons of people, sent them out everywhere into the most rural areas of our country, out into the West, out everywhere, and just went hogwash. That's why there's many more Methodists today than there are Episcopalians. Oh, right. Now, the other thing to know, though, even though it's true that the Wesley brothers started what we know now as the Methodist Church, when they died, they were Anglican clergy. They were not Methodist clergy. They were Anglican clergy. It's synonymous with the Episcopal Church of the United States and the Church of England. Yeah, they were, yeah. Mhm. All right, questions so far? We've got some time left, but questions, comments, insights? Oh, it's a great thing to study. The Wesley brothers, who's a former Methodist, but know this much better than me, right? Yeah. They developed a method of both prayer and study. And so that's kind of where the word comes from. Yes, but it's very much kind of grounded in this idea, kind of, John Wesley is famous for saying,
Do all the good you can.
yeah, that's kind of like, what matters for him, what matters is when his heart was warmed by God, right? So there's this kind of focus, if you will, on doing and really kind of feeling it, really, do you, both worship and otherwise is to get you to kind of just feel it, if you will, right? As opposed to what is more of a Calvinistic approach, which is, I don't care how you feel. God is God. You can feel it or you cannot feel it. It doesn't matter. You're not the point. So. Right. Right. That's correct. That's correct. Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, that wasn't a mix of denomination. It was a way of describing. So even in the Methodist Church today, they still have bishops. So it was a way of describing that they were still led by bishops. So it was called before the United Methodist Church came into being in the 50s, I think it is the 50s. It was called the Methodist Episcopal Church because it was their way of describing that they were Methodist, but they were led by bishops still, though bishops that no longer claimed this apostolic hands-on, and bishops who were not bishops for life. Bishops, it was an administrative leadership office. You were elected to be a bishop, and when your term was over, you were no longer a bishop. That's the way it is in the Methodist Church today. As opposed to in the Church of England, where being a bishop is an ontological act. When you are ordained a bishop, same thing in the Roman Catholic tradition and in the Episcopal Church today. When you are ordained a bishop, you are ordained for life. Nobody can take you out of it. Nobody can take it away from you, right?
They can try.
They can try. They can keep you from ministry, but your ordination cannot be taken away. Yeah. All right. Questions. So here we are. Yeah, it's a good question. We don't know. We don't know because those parts of the New Testament come from some of the other letters, right? Peter and Timothy. So we know that we believe, Timothy was a friend of Paul, so we know that he was there, but Paul doesn't ever lay out, this will be the structure of the church. We see structures of the church in the New Testament. We We are told that there are deacons that serve the church. We are told that there are overseers or bishops, because the Greek word for overseer is episkopos or episcopal, or in English, bishop. So we know there are bishops leading. We know there are deacons leading. We know there are presbyters, from which we get the English word priest, leading in the documents of the New Testament. Can we now claim that the way in which my church is ordered is what that was intended? is a challenge. But we do see a threefold order of ministry in the New Testament: deacons, presbyters, and bishops operating and acting as leaders of the church. Yeah.
Interestingly enough, though, the female leaders of the early church are ignored.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating.
Yeah. Yes. So in the New Testament, there are more female names for leading the church. Well, female names for organizing the church, and a few male names as this kind of formal leadership in the church. That's interesting, very interesting. But it would be wrong to suggest that there aren't many female names that are leading the early church. It's very interesting. You've got Phoebe, you've got, Lois, you've got just this list of names in the New Testament of those who are leading in the church. Yeah. So where are we at this moment? I've started, I've gone back for a second into England and Reformation history. I've located where the Church of England kind of ended up. Then I brought us back in here to the colonies and how there were Anglican congregations or Church of England congregations in the colonies. And at the Revolution, we have this situation where we can no longer be a part of the Church of England. What are we going to do? We're going to set up a denomination here in the United States. We're going to call it the Protestant Episcopal Church in the United States of America. It will describe that we are a Protestant church. It will describe that we are led still by bishops and that we're here in the United States. And then we have this anomaly of finding someone who can be a bishop for the United States. And we have Samuel Seabury, who is the kind of person that does it. What we'll do next week is I'm going to then go into how do they set up this denomination to operate? Because that's where we are today for the Episcopal Church today. How does this denomination operate? Both in terms of, up here we have someone said, like the decision-making tree. How does this denomination operate? And what are some of the beliefs around this denomination when it comes to theology and Bible and some of the other aspects that you have asked about on these sheets? And that's where we're kind of going, if you will. Yeah. Questions? Comments? Yeah.
How long did it take between like the Wesley brothers doing their thing and Barry getting the Scott?
Daniel Seabury. Yeah. It didn't take long. I'm struggling to remember the date. I forget that. Yeah, no, we're talking about the 10-20 year range. Yeah. But in a really short order, the Wesley brothers just decided they weren't waiting around for this. You all can worry about how you're going to find a bishop. We're not going to, the time is too short, And we're going to just start ordaining people as clergy. And they did rapidly. And the church, clergy ordained by them just expanded rapidly. Yeah, yeah. All right. Anything else?
They established a whole lot of colleges too.
They established a whole lot of colleges as well. Yeah, yeah. They accomplished a lot. No two ways about it. No two ways about it. There's nothing like the fear of hell to get you going. All right. Well, God bless you, all y'all online. Thank you for joining today. I hope you all are well. We've captured your name just by having you all here. And we'll see you next week.